Informatica IDMC troubleshooting. We've got this awesome source here. It's got like 200 tips. And today, we're going to extract the absolute best tips, the ones that are really going to turn you into a troubleshooting pro.
Think of us as your IDMC Sherpas. We're here to guide you through all the tricky spots.
Exactly. We're going to break all these tips down into three main areas: data integrity and validation, performance optimization and system tuning, and then integration, security, and compliance.
And within each area, we'll focus on the issues we know you're probably going to face. We'll pull out specific examples so you can remember what to do if things go wrong.
Okay, so let's start with data integrity and validation. Because what's the point of all this data integration if the data itself is messed up?
It's like trying to build a house on a foundation of sand. You can put up the walls and everything, but it's all going to fall apart if the base isn't solid.
Okay, yeah, I love that analogy. So in data integrity and validation, our source has this really cool tip about using regular expressions. And you might be thinking, what the heck are those?
So think of regular expressions like they're your data's own personal bouncer. They're standing at the door of your database, making sure that all the incoming data is wearing the right outfit, making sure it's in the correct format.
Okay.
So let's say you need to make sure that all the email addresses actually have the @ symbol and a.com. A regular expression can do that for you automatically. It can flag anything that doesn't fit the pattern.
Oh, that's so smart. Have you ever had a situation where a misplaced comma in a spreadsheet just totally messed up all your data? I feel like it's happened to all of us at some point, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Regular expressions could really help us catch those errors early on.
Absolutely. They're like those little lint rollers that you use to get cat hair off of your clothes, except they're removing data lint. Those little formatting errors that could really create problems.
Yeah. All right, so we've tackled data accuracy. Now let's talk about speed. Because who wants to wait forever for their data processes to finish?
Yeah, nobody. And that's where performance optimization comes in. It's all about making sure that your IDMC environment is running like a finely tuned race car.
Yeah. One of the most interesting techniques our source talks about is push-down optimization. Now, you might be thinking, that sounds really complicated, but it's actually a really simple idea. Imagine you're trying to juice a ton of oranges by hand. It would take forever.
Yeah.
But if you had one of those big industrial juicers that could handle most of the work, you'd be sipping on fresh OJ in no time.
Exactly. Push-down optimization is like having that industrial juicer for your data. Instead of making IDMC do all the hard work, you're shifting some of those data transformations to the source or target database.
Yeah.
It lets IDMC do what it's really good at, managing the flow of data, and lets the databases handle the more difficult calculations.
So have you ever noticed your data processes slowing down? Maybe taking a lot longer to load data than it used to? Or a specific task just seems to be holding everything up?
Yeah.
Well, our source looks at those common bottlenecks and how to spot the warning signs before they totally shut down your data operation.
Yeah, you got to be proactive, like a mechanic who regularly checks your car for issues before it breaks down.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's move on to something that's super important in the data world. Integration, security, and compliance. This is like the fortress that protects your valuable data.
Yeah, and these days that fortress has to be really, really secure, especially with data moving between so many different systems, often in a multi-cloud environment. It's like having a bunch of castles that are connected by secret tunnels. You need to be sure that each tunnel is guarded and only authorized people can use them.
Oh, absolutely. So you might be working with data that's spread across, say, Amazon Web Services and Google Cloud Platform. Trying to get those two to work together can be a real challenge. They've got different ways of authenticating, different data formats. It's really hard to get them to talk to each other in a secure way. But our source gives some great advice on how to handle this. It really stresses how important it is to test each connection separately before you start moving any data back and forth.
Yeah, think of it like testing each part of a roller coaster track before you let anyone ride. You want to make sure that every single piece is working perfectly so there aren't any unpleasant surprises.
Right. And when we're talking about keeping that data safe, encryption is essential. It's like putting your crown jewels in a vault with a ton of locks. Only people with the right clearance can get in.
And these days, with regulations like GDPR, it's not just a good idea, it's the law. You can get hit with huge fines if you don't comply. It's like making sure that your castle not only has strong walls, but also meets all the latest building codes.
Perfect analogy. Now, before we move on, let's go over some general troubleshooting tips. These are tips you can use no matter what IDMC issue you're facing. Think of these as your trusty Swiss Army knife of troubleshooting.
Yeah, these are the techniques that every IDMC user should have ready to go.
Exactly. So first things first, when something goes wrong, don't freak out. Instead, put on your detective hat and go straight to the logs. They're like the breadcrumbs that Hansel and Gretel left behind, leading you right to the source of the problem.
The logs record everything that happens in your IDMC environment, so they're always the first place to look when something isn't working right. They might look confusing at first, but after a little practice, you'll be reading them like a pro.
Right. Okay, now this next tip might seem obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people forget it. Always, always, always verify your network connectivity. It's like making sure that the road between your data source and destination is clear. If there's a traffic jam, your data is going to be stuck.
Yeah, for sure. Network issues are a really common cause of data integration problems.
Mm,
It's always a good idea to just double check that everything's connected properly.
absolutely. And while we're on the topic of connectivity, let's talk about credentials. You know those usernames and passwords that we always forget? Make sure you're typing them in correctly. Even a single typo can bring your whole data process to a standstill. It's like trying to unlock your front door with the wrong key. It's just not going to work.
Yeah, you got to pay attention to every little detail when it comes to credentials. Double check everything. And if you're still having trouble, just reset your password or contact your system administrator.
Okay, next tip. This one's super important if you're working with a lot of data. Make sure you have enough disk space. Running out of disk space is like trying to stuff a suitcase that's already full. Something's got to give.
Yeah, disk space management is something people don't think about much, but it's so important for things to run smoothly. Make sure you have enough space for all your data and any temporary files that might be created. And don't be afraid to delete old files that you don't need anymore.
Yeah, get rid of that clutter. Speaking of things that can slow down your processes, let's talk about resource usage. You really need to keep an eye on how much CPU, memory, and other resources your IDMC processes are using. Because if you go over your limits, it's like overdrawing your bank account. It's not going to be pretty.
Most cloud platforms have tools that can help you monitor your resource usage, so make sure you're using them. You can see if any of your processes are using too many resources and make adjustments.
Okay, here's a tip that can save you a lot of headaches down the road. Implement retry mechanisms for intermittent connectivity issues. Think of it like calling a busy phone line over and over again until you get through.
Right. Retry mechanisms can really make your data processes more reliable. So if there's a temporary problem with the network or a service goes down for a minute, your process won't just fail completely, it'll just keep trying until it works.
And finally, for those of you dealing with constantly changing data, here's a great tip. Optimize for incremental loads. Instead of processing all the data every single time, focus on just the new or changed data. It's like updating a spreadsheet instead of rewriting the entire thing every time you make a change.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Incremental loading saves you time and resources, and it's super important for anyone working with data that's always changing.
All right, and that brings us to the end of part 1 of our IDMC troubleshooting deep dive.
We've covered a lot, but there's still more to come. Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll get even deeper into data integrity, performance optimization, and more. Welcome back to our IDMC troubleshooting deep dive. Remember those general tips. They're great to have in your back pocket. But now let's dive into some more specific stuff from our source's 200 tips. Starting with data integrity. One thing that really stood out was using data validation transformations.
Oh yeah, those are so important. Like having a whole team of inspectors checking every single piece of data before it gets into your warehouse.
Exactly. Think of them as the guardians of your data quality, right? They make sure that everything's in the right format, catch any missing values, and even apply your own custom logic.
You know, something that really caught my eye in the source was proactively checking for orphan data. You know, those records that exist in one system but not in another.
Oh yeah, those can be a real pain. Like finding a single sock after you do the laundry. Where did its match go?
Right. And those orphan records can really mess things up,
Yeah,
especially after you migrate data or update a system.
totally agree. It's so much easier to catch them early than try to fix a giant mess later.
Okay, let's shift gears to performance optimization. Our source is full of great tips for that. One of the most common ones is using push-down optimization.
Ah, push-down optimization.
Yeah.
The secret weapon for making things run faster. Remember that juicer analogy?
Yeah.
It's all about letting the databases do some of the heavy lifting instead of IDMC. Teamwork makes the dream work.
Right. So how do you know if push-down optimization is the right solution? Like, what are the signs?
Well, if you're working with tons of data or doing really complex transformations, that's a good indicator. Or if your processes are just taking forever, It's especially helpful for cloud databases because it reduces data transfer costs.
It's like taking the express lane instead of the scenic route, right? Push-down optimization gets you there much faster. Okay, now let's move on to integration. Our source highlights the challenges of connecting different systems, especially in a multi-cloud environment.
Oh, yeah. Multi-cloud integration can be a real headache. It's like trying to get musicians from different countries speaking different languages to play together in an orchestra.
Wow, that's a great analogy. You're dealing with different security protocols, data formats, all sorts of quirks. Our source really emphasizes the importance of testing each connection separately before you try to get everything working together.
Absolutely. It's like making sure each instrument is tuned before the concert starts. A little preparation can save you a lot of trouble down the road.
Speaking of preventing trouble, let's talk about security and compliance. Those are non-negotiable these days.
For sure. Our source emphasizes this trifecta: encryption, access control, and regular security audits. Think of it like a medieval castle with multiple layers of defense.
Oh, I like that. So you've got your moat, which is the encryption, keeping the bad guys out. Then you've got the drawbridge, which is access control, only letting the right people in. And then you've got your guards, the security audits, constantly patrolling for any weaknesses.
Exactly. Encryption scrambles your data, so no one can read it without the key. Access control makes sure that only authorized people can see sensitive information. And security audits are like regular checkups to make sure everything's still secure.
You know, one thing that stood out to me was data masking, especially in those test environments. It's like using a stunt double for your data.
Oh yeah, data masking is a great way to protect sensitive information. You can work with realistic data without actually putting the real data at risk. Perfect for testing and development.
All right, so we've got our data fortress all set up, and everything's running smoothly, but you know we're in the cloud now, and that comes with its own set of challenges. Our source actually has a bunch of cloud-specific troubleshooting tips. They're super important for keeping your IDMC environment running at its best.
Yeah, one of the most common issues you'll run into in the cloud is API throttling. It's like, when you're driving on the highway and there's a speed limit, if you go too fast, you're going to get a ticket. And in the cloud, if you try to send too much data at once, you're going to hit those rate limits that the cloud provider sets. And then everything just slows way down.
Oh, so it's like you're trying to send this huge file all at once, and then suddenly it's like everything just grinds to a halt.
Exactly. Our source suggests that you keep an eye on how much you're using the API. And there are ways to avoid these problems. You can batch your requests so you're not sending everything at the same time. Or use something called exponential backoff, where you gradually increase the time between requests if you start getting throttled.
So it's like you're being careful not to slam on the gas pedal so you can maintain a nice even speed.
Yeah.
Okay, so another cloud issue is data latency. We all want our data in real time, but sometimes it can feel like waiting forever.
Especially if you're working with real-time applications.
Mm.
Every millisecond counts. And latency can be caused by a bunch of different things, like network congestion or how far away your data is physically, or even just the performance of your cloud provider.
It's like when you're on a video call and the connection is bad, there's that delay and it's super frustrating.
Right.
Our source really stresses how important it is to figure out what's causing the latency in your environment. That way you can find the right solutions.
Yeah.
So you might need to optimize the way you transfer data, or use caching to keep frequently used data closer to your applications. Or you might even have to move your stuff to a different cloud region.
Yeah, sometimes you got to do what you got to do.
Okay, speaking of cloud stuff, let's talk about those cloud instances, those virtual machines that are running your IDMC environment. If you get too many of them, it's like you're renting this giant mansion when all you need is a small apartment.
Exactly. You end up paying for all this extra space you don't need.
And if you don't get enough, it's like you're trying to squeeze your whole family into a tiny little room.
Nobody's going to be comfortable.
So it's super important to get the right size cloud instances. They should have just the right amount of resources.
And luckily, most cloud providers have tools to help you figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
You can monitor how everything's performing and then adjust if you need to.
It's like having a smart thermostat that automatically adjusts the temperature so you're always comfortable without wasting energy.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
And speaking of monitoring, those tools are really helpful for troubleshooting performance issues in the cloud. If you're seeing things slow down or getting stuck, those tools can help you figure out what's going on.
Yep, you can see how much CPU each process is using, how much memory is being used, even track your disk usage.
It's like having X-ray vision into your cloud environment.
Exactly.
So that's it. We've made it through our IDMC troubleshooting deep dive. Hopefully you've picked up some useful tips and tricks along the way.
Yeah, remember, this is just the beginning. The data world is constantly changing, so you always got to be learning and adapting.
And don't forget about our awesome source with its 200 tips. We only covered a small fraction of them today, so go check it out and see what else you can learn.
Yeah, think of this as a starting point. Now go out there and start troubleshooting.
Embrace the challenge. Learn from your experiences. And remember, with the right knowledge and a little bit of persistence, you can overcome any IDMC obstacle that comes your way.
You got this.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And until next time, happy troubleshooting.